Well, good day, and welcome to the Social Psychology edition of 5 Minute Psych. In this 5-minute segment, we'll explore how others influence us. We'll begin with social norms before looking at ways that our behavior is affected by a group. Then we'll look at conformity and obedience, both dramatic examples of the darker side of how others can impact our behavior. One of the most indirect ways that we're influenced by others is through social norms, which are unwritten rules about how we're supposed to behave in social situations, like what to say or wear, or how to eat and show emotions. A lot of our behavior comes from this, and without the social situation, we don't necessarily follow these rules, and we might eat on the couch in our pajamas or burp without saying excuse me. One thing that we can look at is how being in a group affects the individual's performance. Do we work harder when in a group? Well, sometimes we see social facilitation or better performance because others are present, but other times we see social loafing or the tendency to exert less effort when working in a group than when working alone. And this is more likely to happen if we don't think anyone's watching our individual performance and if we don't care about the task or group. What about how well we think in groups? Are many heads better than one? Well, not necessarily. For instance, with group polarization, this is when people of similar views sit down and discuss their views and then walk away with more extreme views than when they sat down. So as a group, their view becomes more extreme or more polarized. With groupthink, it doesn't matter how many heads are involved in decision making because all they care about is that a decision is made. With groupthink, the group cares more about agreeing, so they put their better judgment on hold to go along with the group. The power of others to influence us is even more obvious with conformity, when we adjust what we do or think to line up with what the group is doing or thinking. Conformity was originally studied in the 1950s by Solomon Asch, who asked participants to make very simple judgments about the length of a line in front of a group. The group was shown one line, and then 3 comparisons would come up, and they had to choose the one that was the same length. The thing was, everyone in the group was in on it, and on some trials, they purposefully said the wrong answer. Asch was most interested in what the real participant would say. Would they go along with the group? Asch found that about half of us conformed some of the time, a quarter of us usually conformed, and about a quarter of us never conformed. These results were stunning, since the task is really easy and no one was overtly applying peer pressure to say one answer or the other. So why did so many of us conform? Well, when asked, the participants explained it in one of 2 ways. First, normative social influence, or they didn't want to go against the group. They knew the group said the wrong thing, but they cared more about the group than being right. Others gave informational social influence reasons, or believed that the group knew the right answer. These people actually started to doubt their own eyesight. The most extreme example of how we're influenced by others is with obedience, when we yield to another who's an authority figure. Now, obedience can be a good thing, and our society would be chaos without it. Imagine if the co-pilot didn't listen to the pilot, or the pharmacist didn't listen to the doctor. But sometimes obedience can be bad, when people do horrific acts and then say they were just following orders. Is that possible? For someone to do horrible things because an authority figure asked them to? Well, Milgram studied this in the 1970s by having participants believe that they were giving increasing levels of shock to another person every time they made a mistake on a memory question. When they delivered the shock, they could hear the person screaming in pain for a while, but at the highest levels of shock, the sounds were just quiet. Of course, no one was really being shocked, but they didn't know that. The big question was, how many participants would deliver shocks to the highest level? When experts were asked to predict this, they said less than 1% would do that. But surprisingly, 65% of people obeyed to the highest level. So what increased obedience levels? Well, if the victim was remote and the authority figure was physically close by, this increased it. But there was no evidence that personal characteristics determined likelihood of obeying, whether the person was male or female, educated or not, religious or not, rich or poor. None of that seemed to matter. It was all about the situation and not personal traits. Well, we just looked at how others influence us, beginning with social norms before examining ways that our behavior is affected when we're in a group. Then we discussed conformity and obedience, 2 dramatic examples of the darker side of how others can impact our behavior. Now, aren't you glad you had 5 minutes?